の悲劇の原因を問いた
Sounds
だ
like
し
a
た。
mother.
ああ、この件に気づい。ああ、ああ、
No.
あ
No.
What's wrong, Dylan?
あ、
What are you doing?
What's wrong, Dylan?
Hey. Hey.
Chen, Chalter, Chen, Alter, Chalter, Alter, Chen, Alter, Chalter, Alter, Alter, Chen, Chalter, Alter, Chalter. Chen 3. Probably one of the most anticipated characters I've had for a long while. Half because of who her banner partner is, half because of how cool her skills look, and 50% because people finally realized how hot, smart, and funny she is thanks to Enfield. But with none of those possibilities being related to actually knowing what she does, and only one being based, a lot of players actually don't really know how surprisingly busted her skill is. So let's analyze her kit. That way I can both talk about how strong and busted it is, while also talking about how weak and mid it is. Starting with S1.
抜刀する抜刀の破るに当たりすなわち
As it's usually the case, this is the simplest skill in her kit. But before we talk about it, I need to introduce her talent once, since it's one of those mega busted talents with a lot of broken interactions. And the first effect is just whatever. More stats. It might have even been better to not have it there since it can dilute an attack buff she receives a little, but I guess we need to reference OG Chen in some way. But it's this next one here that we're actually interested in, since it makes so every one of her attacks becomes weakness damage. This is basically a new damage type currently exclusive to Chen, and what it does is make so every time she hits a mob, the game will calculate theoretical arts and physical damage values taking into account the stuff you see on screen, and depending on which one is higher, changes the damage type of that hit into it. Meaning that Chen technically has no bad matchup in the same way other ops have in terms of damage type, since you'll always choose the optimal one depending on the target. All this must sound very broken, but it gets even better when you look at it with other supports in mind. Chen is an arts card. That's relevant here because pure arts damage usually doesn't pair very well with attack buff, since the formula for arts is percentage based while physical is a simple subtraction. But because of her weakness damage, you can actually use normal attack buffers like Warframe for instance, and they'll be much more effective on Chen than the other arts guards, simply because she will switch damage types if the arts can't keep up with the physical increase. You can even choose yourself which one she will deal if you want, by specifically debuffing either res or defense on certain enemies that have both at very high values, or by using certain buffers like the aforementioned war, for instance she disproportionately benefits one much more than the other for the reasons I mentioned before. And you'll be able to see how effective this talent is when you actually look into her skills. Which is how we finally get to S1. It's a very simple skill as you can see. Just gives her plus 120% attack, turns an hit into double strikes, and applies silence on attack, so basically a fancy way of dealing more damage while applying silence. Thanks to talent 1, this is actually pretty good in adapting to whatever content you ring, since its damage won't fall off a cliff just because the mobs randomly have a shit ton of res now. And the silence C is situationally nice against specific mobs that are usually a pain in the ass to deal with. But if you noticed, right now I started talking like Executor Copers, insisting that the 5 monsters module doesn't make her 100 times better than him. So yeah, this skill is quite mediocre. Not only has the lowest attack increase out of all 3 of them, but its effects are extremely simple while having basically the same cost as the others. The silence can be situationally good like I said, but realistically 99.9% of you watching will never use it, cause the brute force potential of the other skill is just that much better. Something that's very easy to tell because I spent more time in this section talking about the talent rather than the skill itself. So yeah, you can just ignore this one unless you really like Chen, I guess.
She has a lot of skins. I mean, not skins, like artwork.
And only one of them shows her feet, Dempo. Look at the world we live in.
You call feet? Like you barely see her feet?
Yes, that's all, and that's all I get, Dempo.
I hate you.
That's the world we live in.
I hate you.
Now then we have S2.
바토.
This is the obligatory 1000 slash skill that every op who uses T shall have in their kit, although they very clearly try to shake up how Chen does it a little bit compared to the others. What it does is first search for the closest mob inside the range you see on screen, and I do mean closest as in closest to her instead of the blue box. She'll even ignore mobs with taunt if there is someone closer. Then she'll ult up to 10 slashes in a row, each dealing 480% as arts, but as you know, that damage can change to physical thanks to talent 1. If she kills a mob before the 10 slashes end, she will immediately jump to the closest nearby enemy in a 1.7 tile radius and increase the slash count by 1. Then when the slashes end, if the last mob she attacked didn't die and is on top of a deployable tile, she will move to his position. If not, she will remain where she is, but in both cases the skill will still grant her plus 300% attack and 60% dodge for 6 seconds. Like I said, there is still a bunch of slashes, but Hypergriff at least managed to make it feel unique, mostly thanks to how her targeting works and the extra slashes she gets. Both OG Chen and Damia will always stop slashing when there aren't any mobs inside their ranges, but like I said, Chen will keep going even without anyone inside her original range as long as another mob is within a 1.7 tile radius of whoever she kills. That combined with the slash count increasing for every kill means she can be extremely effective at killing big enemy waves as long as they are relatively close to each other, especially if you use buffers to minimize the amount of wasted slashes on stronger targets. You'd think Hypergriff would maybe try to balance it out with the other two by making Chen deal less total damage as a result, but that really isn't the case. Not only does the new one deal more than 2 times OG Chen's total damage, but she also has the weakness damage in case her damage type is countered by either high res or defense. And they also give the same invulnerability the other two have on top of the same effect Damia has, where after the slashes you will retain a huge attack buff to deal with whatever is left without the demerit of only being able to use S2 once per stage, and a bonus 60% dodge on top of it also she becomes a lot harder to kill. And speaking of harder to kill, we also have her talent to talk about. It's nowhere near as broken as talent 1, but still a really good addition to her kit. What it does is make so after Chen doesn't take damage for the next 7 seconds, she randomly heal between 30 to 160% of attack and guarantee a dodge for the next attack she receives. I don't even need to say that the healing is very welcome in any DPS ops kit since it makes them able to self-sustain. But the highlight of this talent is actually on the dodge, since because of the way it's worded, the counter doesn't start ticking after she loses the effect, but rather every 7 seconds since the last time Chen took damage, meaning that it's possible for her to instantly refresh the dodge after losing it, which makes Chen effectively immune to damage against enemies that attack slower than she can refresh it. I'll admit that this is kind of an iffy setup in most stages, since most mobs can attack faster than Chen is able to refresh, and you also have ranged enemies as well as stage hazards that can ruin it, but it's still there for you to use in case you do come across slower hitting mobs. And just like the healing, it is still useful even if you're not taking full advantage of it against every mob she blocks, because it is still a guaranteed dodge. Which then takes us back to S2. Up until now I only talked about its positives, but again that's honestly more of the same Executor Cooper's way of talking, trying to tell that he did not get power crapped by Giant Fize Vampire because Hypergriff just decided to release one of the most absurdly broken modules in the game that make her basically mortal on my But then when you look at the weaknesses as well as how Hypergriff actually designs stages, you'll see how S2 falls off really hard. Starting with the teleport. I only talked about S2's targeting and how it is better than both OG Chen and Damia, but this one effect here arguably makes this skill much more frustrating to use in practice because it basically requires you to plan every action around it. Simply put, if Chen doesn't kill her target with the slashes and there is a deployable tile below them, she will teleport right on top of that mob, which brings a bunch of different problems with it. The first is survivability, since a lot of times if Chen can't kill a mob, that means it's probably a bit too strong for her and therefore they are also capable of easily killing her, especially if it's a boss. And since she is teleporting away from where you deployed her, you probably won't have any support at her new location unless you preemptively place someone there because of this effect. Granted, she does have the 60% dodge as well as talent 2 to help her out, but it's here that the second issue comes in, which is the skill duration time. After the 10 slashes, she will only get 6 seconds of increased attack and dodge to finish the job, which as you can imagine is just not enough in a lot of cases. Another problem is as to prioritizing the next mob closest to either her or the last mob she killed. And this isn't always bad, since it is one of the things that allows Chen to keep attacking enemies even outside her attack range, but it can easily become an issue since, like I said, she will ignore even the ones closer to the blue box. So just having mobs walking near her current target could very well lead to Chen ignoring more important enemies that are closer to leaking. And then we have the damage, which is pretty nice. There's really nothing to complain about it, but there's also not much praise to give. Chen deals around 65k damage per S2, which should be very good on a 20 SP cost skill, but it ends up not being that impressive since it's only single target damage without any additional effect, so it's easily outdone by a bunch of other 6-stars that specialize in single target damage. The thing that Chen does have over them is the ability to go multi-target thanks to gaining a slash for every kill she gets, but then the issue is that Chen isn't particularly amazing at this either. A lot of times needing a buffer like Worf to guarantee that she won't waste slashes because she can't one-shot mobs on her own. So again, you could just use another 6-star that actually specializes in AoE damage and usually get a better performance. And the result is a skill that, because it tries to do both at the same time, doesn't really excel in either single or multi-target unless you're in a very specific kind of environment for it. Really, the only scenario I can see as to actually being good for you is if you're a newer player who doesn't have a lot of options and can't unlock her E2 to get access to S3 yet, since S2 is admittedly really adaptable thanks to Talent 1, and you can use it for both single and multi-target like I said before, even if it's not gonna be the best at it. And because she does pair great with Forfring, who is a very easy 5-star to unlock, it is a very easy skill to get going. So if that's your case, this is probably how you want to use it, but for everyone else you can just stay away from this one unless you really like Chen or think the slashes look cool, I guess.
有効の技立つに当たりすなわち立つ石章抜刀石章は私の決意を犯した君がこの剣を必要とするとき
It doesn't.
The way, yeah, her dress looks a bit like Arcane.
No,
you know, like
no,
the the flap in the middle.
No.
I know.
No.
Why are you?
No.
Why are you not? What are you doing?
Where the fuck is it?
What are you doing? I'm going to go leave now because you're taking forever.
Yeah, where is this, Emma? You cannot give me Chen with that right now, Emma.
You can see it in your channel. What are you talking about? Go back to Chen. It's right.
The fucking short, the fucking cheater. I'll pay you money for that, Hypergrip. Lastly, then we have S3.
抜刀する理由有効の技立つに当たりすなわち立つこの剣とは破るすなわち
Now, I know the situation might look bleak after 2 mid skills, but you really don't have to worry anymore since the next one is genuinely busted on its own. What it does is first send a fucking dragon after activation that's able to run on its own and deal arts damage equal to 6% of a mob's current HP or 580% of Chen's attack, whichever is higher. Not only that, but Chen herself will also increase her range to that of a Lord Guard and be able to hit 4 targets with her hits, dealing 210% of attack as arts 3 times. It's actually quite a lot of stuff to cover, and since the dragon is the coolest thing about S3, I'll obviously talk about it last, cause I'm just that kind of guy. The buffs Chen gets for herself are already really good, and without even taking the dragon into account, she already deals a lot more damage than S2 against single target, around double the total damage to be more precise, while also being able to hit 3 more targets per attack. Although S2 still has an edge against high defense and res enemies since it does have the bigger multiplier. But remember that we're not considering the dragon, so in the vast majority of cases S3 will be a lot stronger than S2 no matter the mob's stats, while also being good against hit-based mechanics thanks to that 3 hits per attack. The range extension is pretty bad, but it is still the best out of all the other arts cards, and since we do have this giant red thing flying around the field, it more than makes up for it. Which is how we finally get to the main attraction in this skill and what truly takes it from good to potentially busted. The way the dragon works is very different from the U event dragon, even though they look almost identical. Like I said when reading S3's description, every time the dragon goes for a mob, it'll either deal 6% of their current HP or 580% of chance attack as arts damage depending on which value is higher. And there are a few reasons to why they made it work that way. The first is so Chen can be a HP scaling DPS that deals more damage the more health a mob has while still having a safety net of minimum damage. The way they can avoid something like Primordial and Telekia, who when against very tanky mobs would actually deal less damage per S3 the less HP they had without a safety floor. So in a lot of cases her pseudo true damage felt basically worthless since the candles will die in just a few hits. And different from Mentfilek, the dragon's damage truly scales with HP. So Chen actually does get stronger depending on who you use S3 against. Something you can take a lot of advantage of in places like IS for instance, since Hypergriff really isn't shy of making bosses with HP bars in the millions there. And the less complicated reason to why they made her damage this way is so you can still use buffers like Warf on it, since if this thing always dealt HP damage it would be pointless to increase Chen's attack. The most interesting thing about this dragon isn't how much damage it deals though, but rather how it deals damage. As you might have noticed through the footage on screen by now, after Chen releases the dragon, it'll keep moving forward on a straight line until it meets a wall, red or blue box. Then when it crashes on it, the dragon will turn 90 degrees to the right and keep moving forward. Rinse and repeat until the skill ends. I've seen some people think this makes its movement complex, but in reality what you're always gonna see is that it eventually reaches a perpetual loop in a corner of the map. And since its movement logic is very simple, there are a lot of cases where even changing Chen's position and direction doesn't affect where it ends up. So in most maps you'll usually only have like 2 or 3 spots where the dragon will end up looping depending on which tile will deploy her and the direction she faces. But it is still important you try to find the best location for her, again because of how the dragon deals damage. After Chen spawns it, every enemy that comes in contact with it in a 1.3 tile radius will take the punch. But after the first hit, they'll all become immune to the dragon until it hits a wall. That's when the counter will reset from mobs hit already damaged and they'll become susceptible to getting hit again. This means that the most effective way for it to do the most damage is for the mob to be enclosed between as many walls as possible so you can keep looping around them and shredding their HP with each bounce. And there's actually a quirk in how fast the dragon can bounce when on a single tile, where the more to the bottom left of the map Chen is, the slower it spins, and the more right and up that you place it, the faster it moves. So you can get up to 10 extra bounces when it's 8 tiles away from the bottom left corner. Do not ask me why it works like that. It just does. But if you assume the dragon only deals the minimum amount of 580% of her attack every hit, and the most amount of bounces, then the total damage can go as high as around 480k per S3, which is more than 3 times higher than what Chen can do on her own. That's why you'll always want to take advantage of enclosed spaces when possible, since this is where the bulk of S3's damage is. And the dragon can be even more versatile when we get to its second main use, map coverage. A lot of ops already do a billion damage per skill, but remember that the dragon can actually travel around the map, so Chen can even cover areas no other op would be able to reach if it deployed where she is. And no matter if she's frozen or stunned or if an attack speed debuff, this thing moves independently of her. The only way to really stop it is if the skill lands or Chen leaves the field, so you have a very versatile form of damage that can double as both a single and multi-target focus skill, while also being able to cover huge portions of maps on its own on a ridiculously low skill cycle, since this thing only costs 25 SP. And when you combine that with the weakness damage, Chen S3 is easily the strongest skill out of all the current 6-star arts cards. You can really just take it anywhere and see it shred from most maps while being able to adjust itself depending on which damage type is best for each situation. It's extremely easy to use and very effective for most of the content in the game, but it also has its flaws, which then takes us to the weaknesses of S3. And really I think all of them can be summarized by one thing: map reliance. No surprise here, given how the vast majority of its theoretical damage is reliant on having a bunch of walls to bounce on. Like I said, without the dragon, that almost 500,000 total damage drops all the way down to 131k if Chen is the only one attacking. So simply because of factors outside of her control, like not having a good map layout, you can lose almost 63% of the skill's total damage. And even that 480k total damage I mentioned is also very unrealistic to happen, since it requires her target to be between 4 walls with the dragon. There is a pretty popular combo where you pair her with Nasty's S3, since the tile she generates is considered a wall the dragon can bounce on. But even this pairing doesn't really solve all the issues here, because even if you ignore how her tile can be a bit clunky to set up in some maps, Nasty can only create 1 at a time, so you are still at the mercy of Hypergriff's map design even in this case, although you do have more room to work something out. And the second issue is another branch of the first one, which is Chen's scaling. I've been praising Talent 1's weakness damage through the whole whole video, with good reason since it is a very broken effect. But it is most likely because of it, the hyperglyph didn't give her any form of res ignore in her kit. And like I mentioned at the very start of this section, S3's multipliers for Chen herself are pretty low all things considered. So she's both incapable of going through high res thanks to no res threat or ignore, and her attack isn't high enough for the physical damage portion to be able to brute force higher defense like someone like Muilna for instance. Because of that, Chen is actually really weak against mobs who have both high res and defense, especially compared to ops that can ignore that purely with numbers like the aforementioned Muilna or others like Sakiko who have both res and defense ignore built in their kits. The dragon can brute force for stats since its minimum damage has such a high multiplier, but this is why I said this issue is related to the map reliance problem, since in a lot of stages you just won't have a good layout that lets the dragon really focus on the target you want most. Normally this would be enough to really hurt any 6-star, and a lot of you might even be rethinking her value now, but surprisingly enough Chen deals with this issue extremely well. It's actually the opposite of what happens on S2, where it feels like that skill tries to do two different things at the same time and ends up in a weird middle ground between them. S3 is both amazing at single target damage, while also being able to cover multiple areas of a map at the same time and deal with big waves. Because of that, it's actually very rare that she ends up completely useless, since you can almost always adapt her to work inside the map doing any one of those jobs, especially because the skill allows you to use it in many different ways to counter the map reliance issue. If you want her to focus on one specific boss for instance, I already mentioned the nasty strat, but even if you don't want to use that, you can also try deploying her in another tile to change the pathing for instance, or even easier just use a buffer. That's actually another strength of S3 I didn't mention, but this skill scales extremely well with buffers like Worf's S2. And just like how that 4-wall setup I mentioned is pretty unrealistic in most maps, it is also very rare for her to be in such a bad position that the dragon never hits her target more than once, especially if you use all the tricks I mentioned before like nasty, repositioning or buffers to make up for that. So in most situations Chen actually managed to hit a good sweet spot in that 131k to 480k scale, which makes the skill extremely versatile, easy to use at a base level, and very good to bring in almost any content you go into. So it's definitely worth investing in it if you manage to get Chen. Overall, Chen 3 Alter Chowder 2 Electric Boogaloo is a very busted up. Hyperglyph really managed to design an arts guard that's honestly the strongest out of all of them, while also not making her just a cert or two. At a base level she is very easy to use and pretty brain dead of course, but especially when you experiment a bit more of her S3 and start using her dragon not just to DPS a single mob, you can actually see how versatile she can be. You're not locking into simply dropping her on the map and pressing a button. Her position and the direction she faces actually matter a lot more than really any other op in the game, so there's a lot of room to optimize and have fun with her gameplay while not sacrificing much of her base power level for people who just want an easy to use guard. Unfortunately with her timeline it's a bit hard to recommend going out of your way to pull for Chen if you already managed to get Wang given who our next limited banner will feature, especially if you already went all in and these random pulls right now. But if you happen to get her as your Consolation PRIZE or is still willing to use her pulls cause you like her kit, then you definitely will be able to get a lot out of it. She's a HP scaler that can switch damage types, benefits from both arts and physical relics and IS, skills extremely well with buffs, is self-sustained and shoots a fucking dragon that can fly around the field killing stuff. It's really not hard at all to see how good she can be. But if you still aren't really sure and want to check all the future ops to decide, you can go watch this video I made ranking every single one of them. Just make sure to join Discord, leave a like and subscribe before you go. And if you want to support me, get Discord perks, early access to videos, or even appear on a Blana special place, you can also consider becoming a member. I'll also think you're really cool if you do that.
この剣の破るすなわち
That's it then. Bye.
無事に終わったな、ドクター。違うぞ。あの光は私の剣が放ったものではない。